Hi, my name is Nadia, and I'm 38 years old. 4 years, I thought I was building my dream life with my husband, until the day he stood in the middle of our hotel lobby and erased me from everything I created. That betrayal changed me forever. Have you ever been blindsided by someone you trusted most? Let me know where you're watching from in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories about betrayal, revenge, and courage. I remember that morning so clearly, as if the walls of my memory had burned it into place forever. The sun was barely out when I parked my car in front of the hotel. The building stood tall and sharp against the early light, its windows glowing faintly like eyes that had seen everything. It wasn't just a hotel to me, it was my dream, my sweat, my late nights balancing books at the kitchen table, my pride stitched into every corner of its carpet and every shade of its paint. I walked in through the glass doors, expecting to be greeted the way I always had been. A nod from the receptionist. A smile from the concierge. Maybe even the scent of fresh coffee from the lobby cafe drifting my way. Instead, I was met with silence. The receptionist, a young woman named Heather, who I'd known since her first nervous interview, didn't smile. She didn't nod. She froze like a deer caught in headlights. "Good morning," I said, forcing my voice into a cheerful tone. "Could you get me the reports from last night's front desk logs?" Heather's eyes darted to the computer screen, then back to me. She looked pale, almost guilty. I don't think I can do that, I frowned. "What do you mean you don't think you can? Just print it like always." Her fingers trembled as they hovered over the keyboard. "Your account, it's no longer active. I don't have permission to give you access." I let out a nervous laugh, thinking maybe it was some kind of system glitch. "That's ridiculous. I own this hotel." Before Heather could answer, a voice sliced through the lobby, sharp and confident. "Not anymore, you don't." I turned, and there he was, my husband, Mark. Dressed in one of his tailored suits, tie knotted just so, polished shoes clicking against the floor as he walked closer. His face wore the kind of smirk I'd seen 1,000 times before, but today it felt different. More final. "What is this?" I demanded, my voice echoing off the marble floor. "What are you talking about?" Mark stopped in the middle of the lobby, right where the morning light poured in from the glass ceiling above. He raised his voice just enough for the employees and a few early guests to hear. "You're done here, Nadia. You're no longer part of this business. From now on, you're just a visitor." The words hit me like a slap. My stomach flipped. My hands went cold. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd misheard him. But the silence that followed told me otherwise. I scanned the faces around me. The bellhop who used to carry my groceries looked away. The concierge, who'd once asked me for advice before proposing to his girlfriend, suddenly found the floor tiles very interesting. Even Heather wouldn't meet my eyes. "Mark," I said, lowering my voice, trying to steady myself. "What have you done?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice just enough for only me to hear. "I've done what you could never do. I've taken control." The humiliation burned hotter than fire. My knees wanted to buckle, but I held myself straight. "This is my hotel," I whispered fiercely. His smirk deepened. "Correction, it was. Now it's mine. Go home, Nadia. Do yourself a favor and don't make a scene." But I already was the scene. Every second of silence around us was another nail in my dignity. My throat tightened as if someone had closed a fist around it. I had two choices: scream and collapse in front of everyone, or hold my ground. I chose the latter. I turned on my heel and walked out of the lobby with every ounce of strength I could gather. The glass doors closed behind me with a soft hiss, like the building itself was exhaling me out of its lungs. When I reached my car, I sat behind the wheel, gripping it so hard my knuckles turned white. My chest heaved, but no tears came. Just a hollow ache that spread through me, bone to bone. The man who was supposed to be my partner had just cancelled me out of my own creation, and he did it like he was brushing lint off his jacket. Driving home felt like floating through a fog. I don't even remember the roads I took. My mind replayed the moment over and over, the way his voice carried through the lobby, the way the staff avoided me, the way he looked at me like I was nothing. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I felt like a stranger to my own life. The house was the same, but everything inside me had changed. When Mark came home that evening, I was waiting at the kitchen table. He tossed his keys on the counter, loosened his tie, and looked at me like I was in his way. "You humiliated me," I said quietly, my voice low but steady. He shrugged. "You humiliated yourself. You were never meant to run that place. I just made it official." I clenched my jaw. "I started that hotel with you. Every decision, every detail." He cut me off, raising his hand like he was swatting away a fly. "Details don't matter, Nadia. Results do. And the result is, you're out. Get used to it." His words stung worse than the humiliation that morning. At least in the lobby, I had an audience. Here, it was just us, and he was showing me his true face. That night, as he slept soundly beside me, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. My mind raced with questions. How long had he been planning this? Who had helped him? Why did no one warn me? And then a different question surfaced, one that burned brighter than the rest. Why did he think I was powerless? He believed cutting me out of the hotel meant cutting me out of everything. He thought I was nothing without him. But he didn't know the truth. He didn't know what I'd kept hidden. Lying there in the dark, my humiliation slowly hardened into something else. Something sharper. Something stronger. It was the night my world collapsed, but it was also the night I silently promised myself that I would rise again, no matter how long it took. That night, I didn't sleep a minute. Mark, of course, slept soundly beside me, his breathing deep and steady, as if the man hadn't just dismantled my life a few hours earlier. I lay there staring at the ceiling, feeling every second drag on like an eternity. It was the strangest thing. I was in my own bed, in my own house, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. When the first light of morning crept through the blinds, I finally sat up. My body ached from staying stiff all night, my mind still raw from replaying the scene in the lobby. I moved quietly, not wanting to wake him. I brewed a cup of coffee, but it tasted bitter no matter how much cream I poured in. Even the kitchen, once a warm space where I planned dinners and laughed over burnt pancakes, now felt cold, foreign. Mark came downstairs around 8, already dressed in another crisp suit. He didn't even look at me when he walked in. He grabbed his travel mug, poured coffee without a word, and started scrolling through his phone. "Mark," I said softly. He finally looked up, his expression flat. "What? I can't believe you would do this to me. To us. To everything we built." He set the mug down and leaned on the counter, his voice calm but laced with dismissal. "You keep saying we. Nadia, there was never a we. I carried that hotel. You were just decoration." The words sliced through me. I wanted to shout, to throw something, to demand he take them back. But all I did was stand there frozen, gripping my mug as if it could anchor me to the floor. When he left for the hotel, slamming the door behind him, the silence that followed was suffocating. I walked through each room of the house and felt like an unwanted guest. Every picture frame on the wall looked like a lie. The smiling couple in those photos wasn't us, not really. Days turned into weeks, and the distance between us only grew. He barely spoke to me when he was home. If he did, it was to bark orders or toss casual remarks, as though I were a housemaid instead of his wife. He started taking his dinners at the hotel restaurant, leaving me to eat alone. The empty chair across from me was a nightly reminder that I was no longer his partner in anything, not marriage, not business, not even life. I started noticing little things. He had hotel staff running errands for him, showing up at the house with groceries or dry cleaning. One evening, I opened the door to see one of the bellboys holding a suit bag. He looked startled when he saw me. Mr. Carter said to drop this off," he stammered, his eyes flicking nervously behind me. "Of course he did," I muttered, forcing a smile before taking the bag. I felt humiliated standing there, realizing my husband had turned our staff into his personal servants, erasing me from even those small parts of our lives. At night, I'd hear him on the phone in his office. He'd close the door, but his voice carried. I'd catch snippets: "She's out of the picture now," or "The board is on my side." Each word sank deeper, as if he was tightening a noose around me in slow motion. One afternoon, While he was at the hotel, I wandered into the study. His desk was cluttered with papers, which was unusual. Mark was obsessive about neatness. Curiosity gnawed at me. I sifted through the pile, my hands trembling. That's when I found it, a stack of forms with my signature on them. But I hadn't signed a single one. My throat tightened as I traced the forged lines of my name. They were good copies, but not perfect. I could see where the pen pressure changed, where the letters didn't quite match my hand. He had faked me out of my own hotel. I shoved the papers back into the pile just as I heard the front door open. My heart leapt into my throat. I rushed out of the study and pretended to be folding laundry in the living room. He walked in carrying a briefcase, glanced at me, and moved on without a word. That night, I lay awake again, staring at the ceiling. The house felt like a prison, every room colder than the last. I realized I was living with a stranger. Or maybe I was the stranger now, trapped in a life that no longer belonged to me. A week later, I got a message from Heather, the receptionist who had looked so terrified that morning in the lobby. She asked to meet me discreetly at a small diner outside of town. When I arrived, she looked nervous, fiddling with the straw in her glass of iced tea. "I shouldn't even be talking to you," she whispered, "but I thought you should know. He's been telling everyone you stepped away. That you wanted out. And, there are rumors he's planning to sell parts of the hotel to new investors." My chest tightened. "Sell? Without me?" She nodded quickly, glancing around as if Mark himself might walk in. "He's telling people you weren't capable of handling the business. That you were just a figurehead." I swallowed hard, fighting back the sting in my eyes. "Thank you for telling me. I know that wasn't easy." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand before slipping out the door, leaving me alone with my thoughts. Driving home from that diner, I realized just how far he was willing to go. He wasn't satisfied with cutting me out, he was rewriting history, painting me as nothing more than an accessory. That night, as I sat in the darkened living room, I looked around the house that felt less like home with every passing day. The ticking clock on the mantel was the only sound. Each tick was a reminder that I was wasting time, sitting quietly while my husband erased me from my own life. I knew then that I couldn't keep living like this. Not as a stranger. Not in silence. Something had to change. And though I didn't yet know exactly how, one thing had become painfully clear: Mark had underestimated me. Mark had underestimated me. That thought clung to me like armor as I sat in the darkened living room, the shadows of the house stretching long across the walls. 4 days, I had allowed grief and betrayal to pin me down, but something shifted inside me that night. I wasn't powerless. I had simply been silent. And silence was a choice I no longer intended to make. So I started with the small things, the papers I kept tucked away, forgotten in an old cedar chest upstairs. The chest had once belonged to my mother, who used to say, "Always keep your independence hidden, Nadia. Even from those you love most. Especially from them." I had laughed at the advice when I first got married, certain I'd never need it. But her voice rang clear in my memory as I unlocked the brass clasp and sifted through the neat bundles inside. Property deeds. Savings bonds. Certificates of deposit. Folders of investment statements with my name alone on the top. My heart raced as I flipped through each page. Years ago, long before Mark came into my life, I had inherited a portion of my grandfather's estate. He was a practical man, one who never trusted others to handle his finances, so he left it directly to me. At the time, I'd tucked most of it away, investing in places Mark never thought to look. He was too focused on the hotel, too obsessed with his own empire. And now, here it was, my safety net, my proof that I was not as disposable as he imagined. The next morning, while Mark was at the hotel, I drove into the city with the documents carefully sealed in a folder. I walked into the tall glass building of Ashton and Rowe Private Banking, where I had quietly kept an account for years. The banker, Mr. Whitmore, a kind man with grey at his temples and sharp intelligence in his eyes, stood to greet me. "Mrs. Carter, it's been some time." "Yes," I said softly, taking the seat across from him. "And I think it's time we reviewed everything." For the next hour, he laid it all out in front of me, accounts that had grown far larger than I remembered, properties I had purchased with rental income still flowing in, and investments that had multiplied over the years. By the time he finished, the numbers on the page didn't just surprise me, they stunned me. I wasn't just comfortable. I was wealthy. Mr. Whitmore leaned forward, his voice lowered. Forgive my bluntness, but your husband, is he aware of any of this? I shook my head. And I'd like to keep it that way. He gave a small approving smile. Wise decision. Many women don't realize how important it is to have independence. You'd be surprised how often men assume control where they have no right. The words hit me square in the chest. He had no idea how accurate they were. When I left the bank, the city air felt different, lighter, sharper, full of possibilities I hadn't let myself consider. I walked with a new steadiness, clutching the folder against me like it was both shield and weapon. That night, while Mark worked late again, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a stranger in my own home. I felt like a strategist. I listed everything I now controlled: stocks, bonds, properties, accounts. I mapped out connections, imagined contingencies. If Mark wanted to erase me from the hotel, fine. I could rebuild something bigger, something of my own. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. The following days became a secret rhythm. By daylight, I played the silent wife, drifting through the house unnoticed. But when Mark disappeared into his hotel world, I built mine. I visited rental properties I hadn't seen in years, quietly reassuring tenants that everything was stable. I met with an accountant, Mrs. Alvarez, a sharp, no-nonsense woman recommended by Mr. Whitmore, who helped me organize streams of income one hadn't touched in a decade. "You've done better than most," she said, peering at the spreadsheets with admiration. "But you've left all this power dormant. Let's wake it up." Her confidence fueled me. For the first time since Mark's betrayal, I felt like myself again, capable, intelligent, in control. Still, secrecy was everything. I couldn't let him catch even a glimpse of what I was doing. So I created small deceptions of my own. I bought a prepaid phone under a different name for sensitive calls. I rented a storage unit across town and moved duplicate copies of every critical document there. And when I visited the bank again, I secured a safe deposit box for the originals. One evening, as I slid the key for the deposit box into my wallet, I caught my reflection in the mirror. There was a fire in my eyes I hadn't seen in months, maybe years. But even as confidence grew, so did tension. Living under the same roof as Mark became a balancing act. He was suspicious by nature, and I knew he noticed changes. "You've been going out a lot lately," he remarked one night, his voice laced with suspicion as he loosened his tie. I forced a calm smile. "I've been redecorating. Looking for ideas." He studied me for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Don't spend too much. We need to be cautious these days." The irony nearly made me laugh. If only he knew how little I depended on him. But I didn't laugh. I simply sipped my wine and kept my secret locked behind my smile. Then, an unexpected twist. A letter arrived one morning, addressed to me in handwriting I recognized instantly, my late grandfather's lawyer. I hadn't heard from the firm in years. Inside was a notice. One of my grandfather's old land holdings, thought to be dormant, had been sold by the city. The payout was far larger than I anticipated. Another windfall. Another reminder that my grandfather had seen further into the future than I ever realized. I sat at the table with the letter, tears welling in my eyes. It felt like a message from him, a reassurance that I wasn't alone. That he had left me with not just wealth, but strength. That night, I tucked the check into my safe deposit box. As I closed the steel drawer, I whispered, "Thank you." In the weeks that followed, my double life grew steadier. By day, I moved silently through the house, pretending indifference as Mark paraded around with his arrogance. By night, I laid foundations, accounts, properties, plans that no one but I controlled. And the strangest thing happened. The more I built, the less his betrayal consumed me. His lies, his arrogance, his cruelty, they still cut, but they no longer defined me. What defined me was this: I wasn't broken. I wasn't powerless. And I wasn't done. The hidden truth was no longer just a secret fortune. It was me rediscovered, unshaken, and preparing for the moment he would finally see what he had underestimated all along. What defined me was this: I wasn't broken. I wasn't powerless. And I wasn't done. So when the gilt-edged invitation landed on our doorstep a week later, I saw it not as an event but as an opportunity. Investor appreciation dinner, that was how Mark described it, tossing the envelope carelessly onto the counter. To him, it was another night of boasting, of dazzling wealthy partners with half-truths and charm. But to me, it was the stage. The perfect place for the mask to crack. "Don't be late," he warned, buttoning his cufflinks as if he were already performing for an invisible audience. "Appearances matter." I smiled faintly. Yes, they do. The night of the dinner, I stood before the mirror longer than usual. For weeks I had moved like a shadow in our home, quiet and unnoticed, but tonight I chose presence. I slipped into a silk gown the color of midnight, simple yet commanding, paired with diamond earrings my grandfather once gave me. They weren't flashy, but their history gave them a weight Mark could never understand. When I entered the foyer, Mark's eyes flickered, a brief pause before he masked it with a smirk. "Trying to impress someone," he teased, his tone dipped in mockery. "Just thought I'd remind you who stands beside you," I answered smoothly, walking past him toward the waiting car. The dinner was held in the grand ballroom of the Regency Hotel, chandeliers scattering light across tables dressed in ivory linen and crystal glasses. The air hummed with the low murmur of power, men and women who could shift fortunes with a signature. Mark slipped easily into his role, shaking hands, clapping shoulders, laughing louder than necessary. I lingered just behind him, watching the way he basked in attention. But I also saw the investor's eyes, sharp, calculating, not as dazzled as he assumed. At our table, conversation flowed around quarterly growth, international expansions, whispers of competitors. Mark launched into his rehearsed stories, inflating numbers, painting himself as the sole architect of success. I sipped my wine, biting back the urge to interject. "Not yet." Timing mattered. Across the table, Mr. Donovan, a silver-haired investor with a reputation for seeing through facades, studied me more than once. Finally, he leaned forward. "And you, Mrs. Carter? You've been quiet tonight. Surely you have thoughts on the hotel's direction?" The table fell silent. Mark's smile faltered, the faintest shadow crossing his features. He hadn't prepared for me to speak. I set my glass down carefully. "Thoughts? Of course. After all, stability doesn't come from expansion alone, it comes from securing long-term revenue streams. Like restructuring lease agreements with vendors or maximizing event space utilization. Those details matter." A murmur of agreement circled the table. Mr. Donovan's eyes lit with intrigue. Mark chuckled quickly, dismissive. Yes, my wife likes to dabble in the numbers." I met his gaze with calm steel. "Dabbling suggests guessing." "I don't guess. I calculate." The tension tightened like a string pulled taut. Mark forced another laugh, but his knuckles whitened around his glass. The courses arrived: seared salmon, roasted vegetables, wine poured with precision, but the real feast was the conversation. Investors asked sharper questions, and without waiting for Mark, I answered. I referenced occupancy ratios, vendor contract cycles, even highlighted missed opportunities in their overseas partnerships. Each word I spoke shifted the room's gravity. And the more I spoke, the more Mark fumbled. He interrupted me once, then twice, but each time the investors redirected their attention back to me, their curiosity piqued. Finally, Mrs. Green, a formidable woman with a reputation for dismantling egos, leaned forward. "Forgive my bluntness, Mr. Carter, but it seems your wife has a stronger grasp on the intricacies of this business than you do. Why has she never joined the executive team?" The question landed like a hammer. Mark's jaw tightened. "Because that isn't her role," he said coldly. I let the silence hang for a moment before answering. "Perhaps it should be." Gasps rippled softly around the table. Mark's head snapped toward me, eyes blazing, but the investors were no longer watching him, they were watching me. As dessert arrived, conversation shifted from polite interest to pointed respect. Mr. Donovan raised his glass. "To Mrs. Carter." for reminding us that true strategy often comes from unexpected places. Glasses clinked. Mine included. Mark's hand tightened on my thigh under the table, a warning masked by a smile. I didn't flinch. After dinner, the guests mingled near the bar. Investors approached me one by one, asking quiet questions, exchanging cards. Each interaction carved a deeper wound into Mark's pride. When we finally slipped into the car, silence cloaked us. The driver pulled away from the glittering hotel, but the real storm brewed inside the leather-lined cabin. Mark turned, his voice low and venomous. "What game are you playing?" I looked out the window, city lights blurring into streaks. "No game. Just truth. Something you've avoided for a long time." He leaned closer, his mask stripped away. "You embarrassed me." I met his glare without wavering. "No. I revealed you." The car ride stretched in silence, thick with words unsaid. But inside me, something had shifted irrevocably. Tonight, the investors had seen me not as a silent ornament but as a force. And Mark, for the first time, had seen the crack in his carefully built world. When we reached home, he stormed inside, slamming his briefcase onto the counter. I lingered at the doorway, unshaken. The showdown had begun not just at dinner, but in the balance of our lives. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of the fight. Mark stormed through the house like a man possessed, slamming doors, muttering under his breath, rattling the very walls with his anger. But I didn't flinch. I walked past him calmly, my heels clicking against the marble like a steady drumbeat of defiance. In the quiet sanctuary of our bedroom, I opened the closet not to escape, but to prepare. My fingers trailed along rows of dresses, handbags, shoes he had bought, each one chosen not for me but for the image he wanted me to project. For years, I had worn them like armor. Tonight, I reached for something different. A leather satchel tucked on the top shelf, mine. My own. Inside were documents, journals, the fragments of myself I had hidden away. Downstairs, Mark barked into the phone, no doubt trying to spin the dinner fiasco before word spread too far. I could hear the brittle edge in his voice, the desperation he tried to disguise. He was unraveling, and he didn't even realize I was no longer in his shadow. I laid my satchel on the bed and pulled open the drawer where I'd kept a small envelope of cash. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to start. Enough to prove to myself that walking away didn't require his blessing. The mirror across from me caught my reflection. For the first time in years, I didn't see a woman shrinking. I saw someone rising. A soft knock broke the stillness. Our housekeeper, Elena, peeked in, her eyes filled with concern. She had worked for our family long before Mark, had known me as a girl. "Are you all right, dear?" she whispered. I nodded. "I will be." Her gaze fell to the satchel on the bed. Understanding flickered instantly. She stepped inside and closed the door. "If you need help, if you need somewhere safe." Her voice wavered, but her loyalty didn't. My throat tightened. "Thank you, Elena. But this I have to do myself." She reached for my hand, squeezing it with quiet strength. "Then walk with your head high. Don't let him see fear. Men like him, they feed on it." I carried those words like a shield as I descended the staircase. Mark was pacing in the living room, his tie loose, his face flushed. When he saw the satchel, his expression twisted. "Where do you think you're going?" His voice cracked like a whip. I set the bag down on the arm of the sofa deliberately, unhurried. "Out. You think you can humiliate me at dinner, make a fool of me in front of my investors, and then just leave?" I met his glare evenly. "I didn't humiliate you, Mark. You did that yourself." His fist clenched at his side, but I didn't move. The silence stretched, thick with everything we both knew but never said. Then, with a calmness that startled even me, I added, "This house, this company, this life, it doesn't own me." "You don't own me. I'm walking away, and I'm doing it on my terms." His laugh was sharp, brittle. "You have nothing without me. No money. No influence, no. I have myself," I cut in, my voice rising for the first time. "And that's worth more than everything you've built on lies." For a moment, He was speechless. The man who always had a response, always had control, faltered. His silence was my victory. I picked up the satchel and turned toward the door. My heart pounded, my palms slick, but my steps were steady. Halfway across the foyer, his voice followed me, low and venomous. "If you walk out that door, don't come back." I paused, my hand resting on the brass handle. Slowly, I looked back over my shoulder. That's the point. The door clicked shut behind me. The night air was cool, sharp against my skin. For the first time in years, the world outside didn't feel like a cage, it felt like an open road. I walked to the corner, where a taxi idled under the streetlight. The driver, an older man with kind eyes, popped the trunk as I approached. "Airport?" he asked. I hesitated, the weight of choice pressing on me. I could have said yes. I could have vanished. But I shook my head. Not yet. Just drive. The city unfolded around me as we moved, towering glass buildings, neon signs, the hum of life that had always seemed distant while I was trapped in that house. Now, it pulsed with possibility. We passed a small park where children's laughter still lingered in the night air. I pressed my forehead to the glass, breathing in the freedom I hadn't dared imagine. My phone buzzed in my bag, Mark, no doubt, but I let it ring, unanswered. "Rough night?" the driver asked gently, eyes flicking to me in the mirror. I smiled faintly, the first genuine smile in what felt like forever. "No. The best one I've had in a long time." We stopped at a modest hotel on the quieter side of town. I paid the driver, thanked him, and stepped inside. The lobby smelled faintly of fresh coffee and polish. The receptionist handed me a key without question, and when I entered the room, its simplicity felt like a palace. White sheets, a small desk, a single lamp. No pretense. No performance. Just space to breathe. I set the satchel on the bed and opened the window. Cool air drifted in, carrying the faint sound of traffic. For a long while, I stood there, letting the silence settle inside me. Walking away hadn't shattered me, it had rebuilt me. The next morning, I woke with sunlight spilling across the sheets. No alarm, no cold silence waiting at the breakfast table. Just me. For the first time, that was enough. I brewed a cup of coffee in the small machine by the desk and sat with my notebook, the same one I had hidden for years. Its pages were filled with ideas, sketches, fragments of dreams I had once thought impossible. Now, they weren't just dreams, they were blueprints. I wrote until my hand ached, words flowing like water finally freed from a dam. Not about Mark, not about revenge, but about me. About what I wanted to build, where I wanted to go, who I wanted to become. When I finally set the pen down, I realized something profound. Walking away wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of mine. And I had chosen it on my own terms.